Remember when a single movie single-handedly destroyed a legendary Hollywood studio? What most viewers never realized is that behind the romanticized dust of the Wild West lay a financial crime scene of unprecedented proportions. In 1980, the cinematic landscape was forever altered by a production so completely out of control, it effectively killed the director-driven era of New Hollywood. We are talking about the infamous Heaven's Gate. Welcome to Silver Screen Files. Today we are opening the vault on the absolute madness of Michael Cimino's uncompromising vision. We are counting down 15 insane details from the set, including the horrifying moment a top studio executive physically collapsed from sheer stress. We will also uncover the bizarre reason armed security guards were hired to keep the studio bosses out of their very own editing room. Hit that subscribe button and let us dive straight into the historic financial disaster that changed the industry forever. Number 15. The 6-month roller skating rehearsal. Fans often assume that a brief, joyous scene in a historical epic is a spontaneous moment of cinematic magic. But the reality on this set was a grinding, agonizing march of relentless perfectionism. Director Michael Cimino envisioned a grand, sweeping roller skating sequence inside a massive, specially constructed wooden rink. Instead of just hiring professional skaters or letting the actors wing it for a few days to capture a natural charm, he demanded absolute, unquestionable mastery. He forced his cast, including major, highly paid Hollywood stars, into a grueling 6-month roller skating boot camp. Day after grueling day, for half a year, exhausted actors were strapping on heavy, blistering vintage skates and rolling in endless circles. They endured bruised knees and aching backs just to prepare for a sequence that barely pushes the narrative forward. The studio was paying premium daily rates for an army of cast members to essentially attend a 19th century gym class in a dusty warehouse. Looking back now, this fact changes how the whole movie feels, transforming a lighthearted dance into a staggering monument of wasted time. Because nothing says smart planning like fixing a simple scheduling problem by creating a 6-month delay. Which brings us to a detail most fans completely missed, involving a different kind of repetitive madness. Number 14. 50 takes for a single whip crack. Behind the camera, this scene was much messier and far more psychologically draining than it looked. In the fast-paced world of filmmaking, doing 5 or 6 takes is completely normal to get the lighting and blocking just right. But on the dirt-covered, sun-baked plains of this production, normalcy had been completely abandoned long ago. During a relatively simple scene involving a character cracking a heavy leather bullwhip, the director became obsessively fixated on the specific auditory snap the whip made in the thin desert air. He flatly refused to let the sound design team add the noise in post-production, which is the standard, cost-effective industry practice. Instead, he forced the exhausted actor to crack that heavy whip over and over again under the sweltering sun. They rolled past 10 takes, then 20, then 30, while a massive crew of highly paid technicians stood around the dusty set in agonizing, silent disbelief. They ultimately shot over 50 agonizing takes just to capture a microscopic fraction of a second of live audio. Every single minute that ticked by in that dead silence cost the studio thousands of hard-earned dollars. Apparently, the budget was held together with tape, hope, and one very tired producer. But if that sounds strange, the next one made even less sense. Number 13. Uprooting a massive piece of nature. There is one tiny detail in the background of the university courtyard scene that says more about the director's unchecked ego than people ever noticed. When looking at the grand filming location through his camera lens, Cimino felt the framing was slightly unbalanced and lacked weight. Most pragmatic directors would simply adjust the camera angle, move the actors, or place a prominent prop in the foreground to fix the visual composition. Instead, Cimino ordered his bewildered crew to find a fully grown, massive oak tree and bring it to the set immediately. This was not a small, manageable prop tree made of foam and fiberglass. They literally had to dig up a gigantic, ancient tree by its deep roots, load it onto a heavy-duty flatbed truck, and transport it across state lines. The logistical nightmare of stopping traffic and keeping a massive, breathing tree alive while driving it over highways is utterly staggering. Once it finally arrived, heavy cranes and industrial machinery had to be rented to lower it perfectly into the background of the shot. The sheer cost of this single, fleeting aesthetic whim could have easily funded an entire independent film. And yes, someone actually got paid to approve that ridiculous decision. And while that was happening on screen, behind the scenes told a very different story about trying to control nature itself. Number 12. Watering the barren desert. For the terrified studio accountants in Los Angeles, this was not just another line item on a budget sheet. It was a glaring, flashing red flag of impending financial doom. A crucial part of the film's backdrop was a sprawling, violent battlefield that was supposed to be covered in lush, vibrant green grass. The glaring problem was that the chosen filming location was essentially a barren, dusty, rocky landscape devoid of life. Rather than choosing a different location or using clever early optical tricks to cheat the background, the production team was ordered to play God. They had to install a massive, custom-built underground irrigation system across the desolate plains. Miles of complex PVC piping were buried deep beneath the hard dirt by exhausted crews working overtime. Gallons of water were pumped in daily at an astronomical cost, just to keep this artificial lawn perfectly green in the middle of a dry, unforgiving expanse. The sheer audacity of fighting the local climate with studio money remains one of the most baffling financial decisions in modern cinema history. In Hollywood, a simple solution often means making it dramatically more complicated. That was only the warm-up, because the next fact is where things really start to unravel for the transportation department. Number 11. Importing a live, antique steam train. The studio had a very different, much cheaper plan at first when it came to the grand locomotive scenes. They naturally assumed the production would rent a standard replica train or shoot at an existing historical railway to save crucial time and money. But this film was operating under a terrifying lack of adult supervision. Cimino demanded a specific, authentic, heavy iron antique steam engine from the exact historical period of the narrative. When they finally located one, the massive, soot-stained iron beast had to be slowly transported across the country on specialized flat cars. But the logistical nightmare did not stop there. Because the authentic train had a highly specific, antiquated wheel gauge, it physically could not run on standard modern railroad tracks. So, the production crew literally had to lay down miles of custom, bespoke railroad tracks across the landscape just to accommodate this one specific antique train. The agonizing labor costs, the tons of imported steel, the detailed engineering, and the heavy machinery required to build a functioning railway for a movie shot is absolutely mind-boggling. It was the kind of decision only the late 70s and early 80s could make with a straight face. Which brings us to a detail about set construction that most fans completely missed, and it involves destroying everything they just built. Number 10. Tearing down a perfectly good town. To understand the sheer scale of the financial hemorrhage, you have to look at the main street of the frontier town set. The production design team had spent weeks meticulously constructing a sprawling, historically accurate Western settlement in the middle of absolute nowhere. It was a breathtaking achievement of craftsmanship, featuring detailed storefronts, rustic saloons, and a wide, dusty thoroughfare. But when director Michael Cimino finally arrived to inspect the finished location, he took one look down the street and decided something was fundamentally wrong. He felt that the physical gap between the buildings on either side of the dirt road was precisely 6 feet too narrow to match his grand visual vision. Instead of using different camera lenses to alter the perspective, or simply adjusting the blocking of his actors, he issued a mandate that sent chills down the producer's spines. He ordered the construction crew to physically tear down one entire side of the freshly built town. They had to move dozens of heavy, intricate wooden structures, exactly 6 feet backwards, and rebuild the entire street from scratch. This one single demand delayed filming by several costly days and added hundreds of thousands of dollars to an already bloated budget. And yes, someone actually got paid to authorize the destruction of their own set. But the real trouble started when the cameras stopped rolling and the actors were left with nothing to do. Number 9. The $1 million waiting room. For legendary actors like John Hurt and Christopher Walken, this was not just another challenging acting gig. It quickly devolved into a bizarre, high-paying hostage situation, masquerading as a Hollywood production. Because the director was so obsessively focused on getting microscopic details right, like the specific shape of the clouds or the dust in the air, the actual shooting schedule completely disintegrated. Major Hollywood stars were flown out to the remote wilderness location and then entirely forgotten about for weeks on end. Instead of filming, They spent their days trapped in their trailers or wandering around the local bars in complete boredom. They were kept on full, premium daily standby rates, essentially getting paid a king's ransom just to sit around and drink heavily while waiting for their scenes. Rumors from the set painted a picture of a deeply frustrated, increasingly intoxicated cast, slowly losing their minds in the remote landscape. It is a glaring example of how poor management can turn a dream cast into a very expensive liability. Because nothing says smart planning like fixing a scheduling problem by paying your cast to do nothing for a month. And while that was happening to the talent, behind the scenes told a very different story about the director's personal comfort. Number 8. The muddy Rolls-Royce. There is a striking visual contrast from the set that perfectly summarizes the staggering hubris of this entire cinematic endeavor. The filming location in Montana was notoriously rugged, constantly plagued by harsh weather, freezing winds, and deep, unyielding mud. The exhausted crew members were trudging through the dirt every single day, battling the elements and carrying heavy equipment until they were physically broken. Yet, in the middle of this frontier misery, Michael Cimino flatly refused to travel like a normal human being. He demanded that the studio provide him with a luxury, top-of-the-line Rolls-Royce to navigate the treacherous, unpaved wilderness roads. Every morning, while his crew suffered in the cold, the director was chauffeured to the set in absolute, air-conditioned splendor. The sheer arrogance of driving a high-end luxury vehicle through a literal mud pit became a dark, running joke among the overworked staff. It was a stark, daily reminder that the man at the helm considered himself entirely above the rules of normal filmmaking, which is a polite way of saying everyone on set probably wanted to slash his expensive tires. Hey, quick pause. If you were suddenly handed an unlimited Hollywood budget and zero studio oversight, what is the most absurd, ridiculous thing you would demand on your movie set? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you are down there, hit that subscribe button to join the Silver Screen Files community. Now, let us get back to the madness, because the studio was finally waking up to the disaster. Number 7. Armed guards against the executives. What most viewers never realized is that the biggest conflict in this movie did not happen on screen between the cattle barons and the immigrants. It happened in the real world, between a paranoid director and the terrified executives who were funding him. As rumors of the skyrocketing budget and the agonizingly slow pace reached the United Artists headquarters in Los Angeles, panic began to set in. Top executives desperately tried to fly out to the remote location to see exactly where their millions of dollars were disappearing to. But when they arrived, they were met with an unbelievable and deeply aggressive surprise. Cimino had actually used the studio's own budget to hire private, heavily armed security guards to patrol the perimeter of the set. He issued strict, non-negotiable orders that no studio executive was allowed anywhere near the cameras or the editing room without his express permission. He effectively locked the people paying for the movie out of their own production, treating them like hostile invaders rather than collaborative partners. Television and film executives are usually terrified of risk, but handing a director millions and letting him lock you out takes a special kind of foolishness. But if that sounds strange, the next detail makes even less financial sense. Number 6. Printing over 1 million feet of film. To truly grasp the catastrophic scale of this production, you have to look at the sheer volume of celluloid that was ruthlessly consumed. In a standard 2-hour Hollywood feature from that era, a director might shoot around 100,000 feet of film to give the editors enough coverage. On this set, the word coverage was taken to an apocalyptic extreme. Cimino insisted on keeping the cameras rolling relentlessly, capturing over 220 hours of raw footage. That is over 1.5 million feet of highly expensive, physical film stock. But the true financial crime was not just shooting it. The director demanded that every single frame of that 1.5 million feet be fully processed and printed by the lab so he could review it. The daily printing costs alone completely eclipsed the entire total budget of many smaller, successful movies from that same year. It was the kind of unchecked, financially suicidal decision only the late 70s could make with a straight face. And this mountain of film was partly due to an obsession with things that were never even meant to be in the movie. Number 5. The unscripted sporting arena. There is one tiny, chaotic detail in the background of a crowd scene that reveals exactly how the script was treated like a mere suggestion. During the production, Cimino suddenly decided that he needed an authentic, lively cockfight happening in the background to add texture to the pioneer town. This sequence was absolutely nowhere to be found in the meticulously approved, heavily vetted shooting script. But instead of just having a few extras stand in a small circle in the dirt, he demanded the construction of a massive, fully detailed, historically accurate wooden arena just for this unscripted moment. He halted the main production, bleeding money by the minute, to wait for this spontaneous set piece to be designed and built from the ground up. Hundreds of extras had to be paid overtime, animal handlers were flown in, and days were wasted shooting a background texture that adds absolutely nothing to the main narrative. In Hollywood, a simple solution often means making it dramatically more complicated. But this was a masterclass in burning money. That was only the warm-up, because the next fact is where things really start to unravel in the editing room. Number 4, the 5-hour, 25-minute work print. When the cameras finally stopped rolling after months of agonizing, deeply frustrating delays, the nightmare merely shifted from the cold dirt of Montana to the dark, isolated editing bays of Hollywood. For a standard, highly anticipated theatrical release, studio executives generally expect a first rough cut to clock in at around 2.5 to 3 manageable hours. But Michael Cimino, completely consumed by his own sprawling, entirely uncontrolled vision, delivered something absolutely unwatchable and genuinely shocking. He proudly presented a preliminary work print to the terrified studio heads that ran for a staggering, mind-boggling 5 hours and 25 minutes. To put that terrifying number into perspective, you could easily watch 2 entire standard feature films back to back, take a lunch break, and still have time left over before his epic finally rolled its final credits. The pacing of this massive cut was so agonizingly slow, and the scenes were so heavily bloated with unnecessary, indulgent coverage of empty landscapes and background crowds, that it barely resembled a cohesive, functioning narrative. When the deeply panicked studio executives gently suggested making necessary, practical trims to secure a reasonable, profitable theatrical release schedule, Cimino notoriously balked at the mere idea of compromise. He famously, and quite arrogantly, declared to the press that his monumental 5-hour cut was a pure cinematic masterpiece, and that it was merely 15 minutes longer than the average audience could possibly endure. The sheer delusion of expecting casual, everyday moviegoers to sit in a dark, uncomfortable theater for nearly half a day without complaint is absolutely staggering. And this is where the story becomes less funny and a little more heartbreaking for the people holding the checkbook. Number 3. The physical collapse of a studio boss. Hollywood executives are notoriously tough, hardened business people who are used to navigating high-stakes financial gambles and massive, unpredictable creative egos every single day of the week. But the sheer, unadulterated shock of what happened with this completely unhinged production actually pushed one man past his physical breaking point. Stephen Bach, who was one of the highest-ranking and most influential executives at United Artists at the time, was deeply, personally involved in trying to salvage the spiraling, chaotic disaster. He had spent agonizing months trying to rein in the rebellious director, defending the ballooning, unstoppable budget to angry shareholders, and desperately hoping the final footage would somehow justify the catastrophic expense. When Bach finally sat down in a dark, private screening room to watch a rough cut of the wildly over-budget film, the horrifying, undeniable reality of the situation fully set in. As the hours dragged on and millions of dollars of pointless, sprawling, unusable footage flickered across the screen, the immense, crushing pressure of the looming financial catastrophe hit him like a heavy freight train. The stress of realizing that the studio's money was completely, irreversibly gone, and that the movie was a slow, unmarketable mess, caused Bach to physically collapse. He literally required urgent, immediate medical attention just to cope with the sheer, unprecedented panic and physical toll of that single screening. It is a terrifying, visceral reminder that behind every massive cinematic failure, there are real people whose careers, livelihoods, and health are being entirely destroyed. Because apparently, Hollywood looked at that problem and thought, yes, let us make it dramatically worse. Number 2, the horrifying animal cruelty allegations. While the massive financial mismanagement and the bloated runtime are the things film historians talk about most, there is a much darker, far more disturbing legacy attached to this troubled production. During the chaotic, poorly supervised filming of the massive, sprawling battle sequences, the reckless pursuit of cinematic realism crossed a deeply unethical and entirely unforgivable line. There were multiple, highly credible reports and deeply troubling allegations of severe animal cruelty occurring on the muddy, freezing set. Horses were allegedly tripped using dangerous, hidden wire rigs to make their falls look more dramatic, sudden, and violent on camera. Live explosives were reportedly detonated far too close to terrified animals, causing severe, permanent injuries and widespread panic among the helpless livestock. In one particularly infamous and grim detail, real blood from slaughtered animals was supposedly brought onto the set to be smeared on the actors for added, unnecessary authenticity. The resulting outrage from these horrifying, unchecked practices was a massive, industry-wide wake-up call that could not be ignored. The sheer volume of complaints and protests surrounding this specific movie directly led the American Humane Association to severely tighten their oversight on all Hollywood sets going forward. Decades later, this one horrific, reckless decision still changes how fans remember it, forever staining the film's artistic reputation with a dark, undeniable shadow. It is the direct reason why we now see the strict, legally binding, "no animals were harmed" disclaimer at the end of every single modern movie. That was only the warm-up, because the next fact is where things really start to unravel, and the true, historic cost of this disaster is finally revealed. Number 1. The flop that single-handedly killed United Artists. Fans often assume that a bad movie merely loses a bit of money, fades into obscurity, and becomes a funny, harmless footnote in cinematic history. But the truth behind this particular disaster was so completely catastrophic, it entirely destroyed a legendary Hollywood empire and abruptly ended a golden era of filmmaking. United Artists was not just any random studio. It was a legendary, highly prestigious institution, originally founded by cinematic titans like Charlie Chaplin and Mary Pickford. Through the 1970s, they aggressively championed the New Hollywood movement, famously giving visionary auteur directors total creative freedom to make masterpieces like The Godfather and Taxi Driver. But handing Michael Cimino an unlimited, unchecked blank credit card was the fatal, irrecoverable mistake that brought the entire historical house down to the ground. When Heaven's Gate finally premiered to the public, it was brutally, mercilessly torn apart by confused critics, who publicly called it an arrogant, bloated, deeply incoherent mess of a film. Audiences entirely rejected the sluggish pacing and the confusing narrative, and the film earned back only a tiny, microscopic fraction of its staggering, unprecedented $44 million budget. The financial crater left behind by this singular production was so massive, so incredibly deep, that the parent company, the massive Transamerica Corporation, completely panicked and immediately pulled the plug on the whole operation. They forced the historic, deeply respected studio to be unceremoniously sold off to MGM, effectively ending United Artists as an independent, major creative powerhouse forever. The reverberations of this one single failure instantly killed the golden era of director-driven cinema, terrified every other studio into taking back strict creative control, and changed the very business of Hollywood permanently. Heaven's Gate remains a towering, terrifying monument to unchecked ambition, massive ego, and the ultimate cautionary tale in modern Hollywood economics. What is your take on this historic, colossal financial failure? Do you think any modern director could possibly get away with spending this much money today without oversight? Or has the studio system learned its painful lesson for good? Drop your thoughts down in the comments below, because I read every single one of them. If you enjoyed diving deep into this cinematic crime scene, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Silver Screen Files, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an investigation. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, until next time, keep rewinding the memories.